like traditionally, classically. Imam Ahmad has some very strong statements that when I would explain them to other people, they said, that's crazy. You know, how could you challenge an ijma'? And so he has a pretty good, solid research on the subject. He wrote back in the mid-2000s. I benefited greatly from that. That was the first exposure I had to his work. It was a good comparative analysis of the different schools of thought in Islamic derivational methodology, usul al-fiqh, and how we treat ijma' and what is an ijma' and how much weight does it hold, which means consensus for those of you that are hearing the word ijma'. Here at MCC, we want to try to use as much English vernacular as we can so that we can understand our religion and people will not feel like we're being spoken over their head. Oh yeah.
Just announcement once you are finished.
Okay. And so, I'm sorry, mashallah, he has brought a guest from Zaytuna, the sister, inshallah, will make an announcement shortly. So, I found him on Twitter. We exchanged some things and, kind of follow each other and pick up information and pass on information together. And then before this event, I had the opportunity of talking with him. And, it's a lot of scholars, perhaps unintentionally, present themselves in an elitist fashion, meaning it's very hard to get through to them. When you're just trying to have a conversation with a scholar, many of the other scholars that I've dealt with, unless I know someone in their inner circle, which is unfortunate because this idea of wasta in the Muslim community is really based through this tribalist mentality of class system, whereas a real Muslim, hayyin, layyin, sahil, qareeb, as the Prophet ﷺ defined, those who would never be close to hellfire, is that they're humble, they're gentle, they're easygoing, and they make you feel close and comfortable. So this is what I have felt from the Shaykh. From the moment I got his number and spoke with him and his making time and his busy schedule within the next day of first, some sheikhs you'll talk to him, it's like, inshallah, talk to my secretary, maybe in 3 weeks, I'll talk with you. I've seen this, unfortunately. So it's a beautiful thing that we still have that prophetic model alive and well of just talking with another believer and exchanging ideas on an even platform. So I'm going to let the sister, please forgive me.
Please just, if everyone can register.
Okay, yeah.
This registration sheet.
Please go ahead and pass it, okay. Go ahead and pass it around. Everybody go ahead and register. Is that those who go together?
Well, these are the feedback forms.
Okay, excellent. So they're following the professional model of involvement. So Zaytuna is the first Muslim accredited Islamic theological seminary that's respected, and because of the professionalism and the quality that it is presenting. So I think it's a great honor and blessing to have someone come here from there, and we should follow what they're doing. As American Muslims, we need to see how we're rooted in this society and how we where our knowledge and resources like Maghrib Institute and otherwise are coming from, and try to tap into those things. So Jazakumullah khairan. I will give the mic to our guest scholar, Sheikh Abdullah Ali. If you wanted to hold it, you can. If not, I think they could hear fine, just like that.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alameen, wa salatu wa salam ala ashraf al-anbiya wa sayyid al-mursalin, nabiyyina wa habibina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. اللهم زدنا ولا تنقصنا واكرمنا ولا تهنا واعطنا ما تحرمنا واثرنا ولا تؤثر علينا وارض عنا وارضنا يا رب العالمين. ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله.
Alhamdulillah, first and foremost, I'd like to thank Imam John for his gracious words and also the invitation to both Zaytuna College and myself to be present with you during this weekend and to visit your beautiful masjid, your institution here. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala increase His beauty and make it stable and make it grow, inshallah, and make the people who are part of this community to grow in every single way possible in terms of good. Alhamdulillah, as mentioned, I'm a teacher of Islamic law at Zaytuna College. I've been with the college since 2007, when it was called Zaytuna Institute. So since then, we've been obviously said Zaytuna Institute, and a lot of people still make that mistake because unless you know how long he's been following Zaytuna, so a lot of people still have in their minds Zaytuna Institute, when we changed the name to Zaytuna College once we transitioned into the college. So at Zaytuna, we have two fundamental programs. One was a bachelor's program, which is in Islamic law and theology, and then a master's program, which is in Islamic text. And our program is completely accredited. We can accept students from all around the world. And actually, I have our first international student this past semester. They had come from Sweden. So, alhamdulillah, take your time. Please visit the website to look into the college when you have the chance. After that, I'll just offer just a few words of introduction related to the topic because this was supposed to be sort of a conversation. As I was told, this phrase, "It's American as apple pie," apparently it originates from the 19th and 20th century, which was considered to be a time of American prosperity. And that because Americans were doing so well, one of the signs of them doing so well was that everyone was making apple pie. They had enough to buy and make apple pies. And so it sort of comes out of that, at least according to a little bit of research that I've done on the issue. But of course, we're not here to talk about apple pies. We're here to talk about ideas of identity. And even the word itself, identity, its etymological roots is the idea of sameness. What does it mean to have an identity? That you can't have an identity separate from a community, right? There's no such thing as really having an individual identity in the sense that we, at least the word itself originally meant. Even though today there is a very strong push in that direction that identities can sort of just simply constructed by an individual based on how people feel at any given moment, that your identity, how it's expressed. But of course, individuals, people are very complex, and there are different aspects to our identities and things that make us different from one another. And Surah Hujurat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the famous verse that we all have heard and heard recited multiple times, he says, Ya ayyuhan nasu inna khalaqnakum min dhakara wa untha wa ja'alnakum shu'uban wa qaba'ila li ta'arafu inna akramakum inda Allahi atqakum inna Allaha alimun khabir. O humanity, verily created you from a male and female and make you into peoples and tribes in order that you come to know one another, to become familiar with one another. And the most noble of you in the sight of God is the one who is most dutiful, is the one who is most God conscious. So in this particular verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he, first and foremost, he emphasizes the fact that there's a certain type of sameness that we all share. There's a sameness that begins with, min dhakar wa untha, that we actually originate from a man and a woman. And so, of course, Adam and Hawa, Adam and Eve are our parents. All of us share the same blood, right? And of course, it means something different today in the same blood, in the sense that the blood that runs through all of our veins originate from two people, right? And it believes that goes back to a single person. Right, but we all have this blood that runs through our veins, so we share that. There's a sense of sameness, and we have human identity that we are all the same in that sense, that we come from the same mother and father as peoples. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala goes on further, of course, and says, and He made you into shu'ub wa qaba'il, make you into nations or peoples and into tribes. And so here now he's talking about the point of difference, an aspect of difference between people, right? But even if we go back to the aspect that I said is the aspect of sameness with regard to our origins, that there's an expression of difference even there too. And that is to say that the difference in sex or gender, right? Right, the human beings, we're all human beings, but we're different in terms of our genders. And so the different aspects of our identities, they will have an effect on the way that we perceive the world, and the way that we perceive one another, the way that we interact with the world. They're extremely important things to highlight, you know. So Islam is not about trying to negate or erase difference. If anything, is the opposite. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to acknowledge the difference, acknowledge the fact that He is the ultimate cause of those differences, but at the same time, He wants us to become familiar with one another, لِتَعَارَفُوا, to know one another through and appreciate those differences and see how those differences can enhance to our existence, enhance our civilization, among other things. You know, so it's often said that, or implied even, that ideology is the root cause of radicalization. Right? So we've heard it said that that Muslims are violent because of their religious beliefs, right? Or certain other people are violent because of their particular beliefs, or they do a certain because of their religious beliefs. And I think that's something we have to really resist, you know, those type of ideas, be they about Islam or even about other people. So for instance, today you find a very strong emphasis on whiteness and how whiteness leads to certain types of actions. Right? You know, this is like, okay, in particular coming from the left, it's like this idea, if you're a white person, you're more likely, because of your whiteness, you do this, or because you're white, you're going to automatically be an oppressor, you're going to be a victimizer. At least that's the implications, right? And we have to resist this type of thinking, because people are individuals at the end of the day, and every individual is complex, and there are different aspects to who we are. If Islam or violence or Muslims who are violent are led to become violent because of their religious beliefs, then why haven't Muslims always been violent throughout human history? And why are not the overwhelming majority of Muslims on the planet violent? Right? And I would say the reason is because individual identities are complex, they're complicated, they are constructs, that they say they are combinations of things, you know, so that your family upbringing, your experiences, your gender, your all those things have an effect on how you read the book. Why is it that Muslims, when they read the same verses that extremists read, we're not led into violence? And I'll tell you, because of different experiences that we have. Different experiences, we have different backgrounds that we have, and so, you know, they have certain experiences that lead them to appropriate or misappropriate those verses, you know, and we have certain experiences that don't allow for us to misappropriate those verses. So identity is an extremely important part of this, but when it comes to American identity, there are many different ways you can talk about American identity. You can talk about American identity from the regard of race, or you can talk about American identity from regard of philosophy, right, or governmental structures, or economic philosophy, right? There are a lot of different ways you can speak about Americans and what is authentic Americanness, you see. And I know that for Muslims, especially many people who actually have immigrated to America, they have really struggled. Many of us have struggled with this idea of being American on paper, but not really American authentically. And African Americans in general have struggled with that over the time as well. Right? That African Americans, especially if you go back to 50s, 60s, and the Nation of Islam, and a number of other movements, but especially with regard to the Nation of Islam, this emphasis on the idea that we're not true Americans. And if we were truly Americans, we would be treated equally. Right? So Elijah Muhammad didn't discourage black people from participation in politics. He discouraged them from joining the military, among other things. They said, well, no, we're not true Americans. When the Constitution was written, when the Declaration of Independence was written, those documents did not give any consideration to us with regard to our Americanness or even our full humanity, among other things, right? Right. So Muslims coming to this part of the world as well struggle with this, and even to the extent I remember growing up that it was often said, like when someone would say, a Muslim would say, I'm an American. And sometimes, like, especially if we meet some of our Arab brothers or sometimes from other places, they would say, well, no, you're not an American, you're Muslim. And I was like, well, okay, I don't see why being an American has to be seen as the opposite of being a Muslim, right? But again, coming with a certain sort of idea about what it means to be an American, So your experience has led you perhaps to believe that, okay, American is one thing, and my ideas about being American has led me to be something different. You see, so they're not a dichotomy. One is a religious identity, the other is a national identity. Right? Being an American doesn't necessarily mean that I endorse foreign policy, right? For instance, But this is one thing. Alhamdulillah, we're Muslims right now. We've come to a different stage in our development, I would say, where these are largely no longer a problem, but I'm quite sure the Imam can add some other things, and there's some other things I want to add, but I'm going to leave something for you to actually add as well. So.
Go ahead. So I really wanted to ask you a question. Sheikh, could you go a little bit, because when we study Islamic law and we study the depth of urf and ada as a basis for so urf and ada. So urf would be something that generally the whole society is comfortable with. So that would be your culture. And then ada is a custom that could be a specific area of people. And both of those, so you have Quran as the main source of legislation of Islamic law. Then you have the authentic Sunnah, and we could go on and on, there's many different things, but one of those that the classical four schools of thought have all agreed upon, which is a basis for legislation of Islamic law, is the local custom. So I'd just like, Sheikh, if you can kind of maybe perhaps go through some examples, or to tell us about how the Prophet ﷺ, there's an attitude that's presented that everything, polytheist was rejected. Was it not that the Prophet ﷺ and the companions generally, in many customs and cultures, they elevated and preserved parts of their historical Arab identity because it didn't? So if you could kind of go into that.
Yes, definitely. And actually, before I go on, I just want to just mention that, like when I first spoke with the Imam on telephone or anything, I just subhanAllah, I was really impressed with him. And if anyone doesn't know that he has excellent Arabic. I mean, like, he speaks Arabic fluently, and you wouldn't even detect that he's not Arab, right, when you hear him speak Arabic. Because most of our conversations on telephone were in Arabic largely. So I just wanted to mention that, so you have a very a valuable asset here with you, so you should feel blessed to have him with you. With regard to the issue of custom or culture, the two words adhan and urf, generally the ulama, the scholars, they utilize them synonymously, that it's okay, well, that people have culture, everybody has culture, right? And when the Prophet ﷺ, he appeared in Mecca, we know that the only thing he was really, well, not the only thing, but his main concern was with people devoting themselves to things that could cause them neither harm nor benefit, right? So the idols themselves, so they thought that these things could actually have an effect on their lives, if they disrespected them. There are others who were exploiting the very fact that the people had bought into the idea that these were a sort of a pantheon of gods, and they shared a partnership with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, of course, other concerns he had were, with, of course, the oppression of women, the infanticide, and among other things like that, the oppression of the poor, slaves, among other things. But the Prophet ﷺ never disavowed his people. Right? If anything, he spoke to them, Ya qawmi, he said, oh my people. And this was the sunnah, or the tradition of all of the messengers, the prophets that were mentioned in the Quran, and when they appealed to their people, they said, "You are my people." They didn't disavow them, right? They may disavow certain beliefs of theirs, certain actions of theirs, right? But even if their people continued to, as you know, as people continue to actually worship their idols, the Prophet ﷺ, he found ways to work with them, right, in good ways. And so, for instance, you think of the hisab, and so the embargo, where the Muslims themselves were blockaded for about 3 years, according to the Sirah, and the people from Banu Hashim, who were idolaters, they actually suffered with the Muslims. You know, because of tribalism, you know, tribal commitments, you know, they suffered with the Muslims. But at no time did they ever offer the Prophet ﷺ, you know, we should, you know, worship Allah one day and you worship our idols one day. You know, nor did the Prophet accept any such offer, right? That if it had appeared, right? But he found it easy to work with them. You know? But many of the customs, if you look at, for instance, in inheritance law, one of the things I teach is inheritance law at Zaytuna. And you look at the way that the system itself is set up, you'll notice that it reflects or mirrors many of the same pre-Islamic preferences that exist with regard to the agnate relatives. You know, so for instance, the relatives from the father's side are given a certain sort of privilege that the relatives from the mother's side are not given when generally people they die. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that the mother's family don't benefit as well. Of course, when the mother dies, and of course her family, but again, the male members of her family sort of get these certain preferences. That itself, that particular scheme, it existed prior to Islam, and the Prophet ﷺ found it unproblematic. Apparently, found it unproblematic to maintain it. Right? And then the Quran also emphasizes some of these issues too. You know, so there are definitely things about culture that, when we find them useful, beneficial, then we're expected to embrace them and not see them as things that are negative, right, naturally. And one thing I think we have to get straight to, and I think that this is one thing that the community suffered with for perhaps a century, if not more, in reaction to European colonialism, is this idea that unless something originates with the Muslims, it cannot be, or it can only be validated as something legitimate by the Muslims. And so what I mean by that is, we've seen this time among a number of Muslim writers or scholars who, let's say for instance, we're talking about economics. You know, so it's like the economic system. So Islam has its own economic system. You know, so you guys have capitalism, you have socialism or communism, and we have our own as well, right? So scholars start to write about what they call Islamic economics. They try to extract something from the Sunnah, from the Quran, whatever, so the principles. And people like Abdullah Maududi, may Allah have mercy on him, for instance, writes his book on Islamic economics, and he says, well, you know, that Islamic economics is somewhat of a marriage between capitalism and Marxism, capitalism and socialism, right? It's something in between. It's a via media sort of system itself. But you really don't see sort of systems articulated by the Messenger alayhi salatu wasalam. You know, it's not articulating a theory of currency or a theory about the value, where things get their value from, right? Or macroeconomic theory.
Sort of a moral guidance, right?
Right, exactly, yeah. So yeah, that the Prophet ﷺ offers moral direction more than anything else. You know, that there's a major concern with him with prohibiting transactions that are exploitative, and in particular, he's interested in that because that's another thing that I teach as well. It's commercial law. So he's concerned with things that are exploitative, oppressive, and so he's concerned with that. Apparently, he's concerned with that because he sees that if an individual involved in a transaction feels that they've been cheated, right, this will lead to disputes, and disputes eventually lead to fights, and fights leads to war. So the Prophet ﷺ, anything he suspected was going to go down that road, he said, no, haram, can't do it because he was a peacemaker. He came here, so he didn't come saying, you know, well, I have this idea of this new type of transaction. Let's call it lease purchase.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Bismillah, this is a Muslim invention, right? And so the fundamental point I'm trying to make is that, and the same thing comes to like government too. It's like, okay, well, you know, as Muslims, we talked about democracy a long time ago, right? Like, you know, you guys talk about democracy. No, yeah, with Islam is by its nature democratic, right? You know, and the Constitution of Medina, right? It's proof that the Prophet ﷺ, we already had a constitution. We beat the Americans to the Constitution. When you actually look closely at this, what we call the Constitution, it's not really a constitution. But again, it's because of the idea that it has to originate with us. But the truth is that all throughout human history, intercultural exchange has always been the norm. It has always been the norm. And one of the greatest proofs is that is all you have to do is open the Quran, and you'll see in the Quran words that clearly do not originate from Arabic.
Injil.
Right, like Injil is one of them, the word for gospel. I mean, they're words, they're Hebrew words that originate from Jahannam, words that originate from Hebrew in the Quran, like the names Ibrahim, Ismail, Ishaq, and Yaqub, and Yusuf, and Yunus. These words originate from Hebrew, and you have words that originate from the Eastern African Abyssinian language that are in the Quran. There are words that originate from Persian. You have words like dinar and dirham. They're not originally Arabic words, right? So there are all these words that have been Arabicized. We don't say that they're not Arabic words, you know. We say they are Arabic words, but they originate from a different language, right? So it's like the word in English, like Muslim, they say Muslim, right? You know,
Yeah.
so, you know, Muslim becomes like an English word. You know, it's their distortion, their sort of distortion of that particular term. You know, but alhamdulillah, today they finally got it right. They say Muslim, you know, more and more they're starting to say that, you know. But I always felt like, you know, that it was like a disingenuous sort of act by people who call you, are you a Muslim? I say, well, I'm a Muslim. I mean,
There you go.
as if like it's difficult to say Muslim. You know, we
Yeah,
have the word
S.
Muslim, right? We have Muslim in English already. Just take the N off and put an M there. You know, it's the same word.
Do we have any questions? Please feel free to ask any question, culture, religion, Islamic law, whatever questions you may have. We want to create a vibrant discussion. Bismillah. Ladies? Allahu Akbar. Okay. Huh? Where?
Oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yeah.
Oh, okay, Khalid.
The Sheikh was talking about how you were talking how you're an individual frame of reference, give him some certain concepts about Islam and Islamic traditions. But in Islamic traditions, we know like the Quranic culture, the Quran can be understood on sab'at huruf, 7 different levels. So if you're a prophet, you understand Islam with a huge philosophy of knowledge. If you're a farmer, you understand it at that level. You still share the same faith, but your education, your frame of reference give you that understanding. But still, we as Muslims, we have to have a solid knowledge of the ultimate values of Islam. So we have to have least common denominator. You cannot have somebody that believes in killing non-Muslims, that this is a jihadi act, and so on. I mean, no matter what level of frame of reference you have, there are the least common denominators that you have to understand, and you have to, you know, as scholars,
You have to embrace them, right?
Teach the average person, and people think Quran has. You can find the treasures of Quran is in pointing I feel the Quran will point the finger. It's a philosophy of knowledge. Will tell you, "Unzuru ila al-ibli kayfa khuliqat," but you have to have that free mind to think and be innovative. It's not like you're going to find everything in Quran. Quran is that index finger that will
Guide.
Yeah, like there is a
It's
ayah
a
that
guy.
says, "Unzuru," yeah, what means we will show you the signs and the horizon to think and to make your own conclusion.
Yes, I mean, yeah, definitely the importance of non-negotiables, and so Imam John, he actually referenced my piece on ijma, or consensus, and one of the things about that article that I tried to highlight was that in spite of the ability to question whether or not consensus has actually ever happened in Islamic history, we still are left, or have to have some concept of consensus, which I call like ma'lum al-din bid-darura, sort of this is a matter of matters that are known by necessity to be part of the religion. So there are certain things that are non-negotiable, and the one thing that's fundamentally different between those particular teachings of Islam and those we generally call sort of ijma is that ijma, in general, it's the result of ijtihad, like sort of this whole process, interpretive process, whereas where ma'lum al-din bid-darura, it comes through tawatur, through sort of transmission, sort of indisputable authentic transmission. So there are definitely these non-negotiable beliefs, and so, like, of course, everybody has to pray 5 times a day. Everyone has to believe in Allah, believe in the Messenger, believe in the hereafter, among other things. There are those things that are part of the non-negotiables, but there's quite a bit beyond those things. Those lists, a very small list of things that where there's a lot of flexibility. The Quran says, وَمَا فَرَّطْنَا فِي الْكِتَابِ مِنْ شَيْءٍ, that we have not neglected a thing in the book. Right? And that just doesn't mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us the details of every single issue. Yeah. What it means is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us the universal principles that we are to live by and apply in our lives, and the rest of it, alhamdulillah, He gave us the freedom for us to sort of figure it out as we move through life. Had He explained every single thing, then we actually would be living in, very in constraints, very severe strictures on our lives. So culture becomes one of those areas which is most fluid and flexible, and people have benefited from one another. So a lot of times you read books and they'll say things like the Arab contribution to this, Arab contribution to that. Now the word Arab actually doesn't really mean Arab in the true sense of Arab. It's just that the Europeans attributed a lot of these things to Arabness because the Arabs sort of become sort of the roots of Islam, right? Well, Islam originates in Arabia, but a lot of Muslims started to associate themselves with Arabs or claim to be Arabs, but people maybe originally from North Africa, or even places like, even Palestine and Syria. These are not places which were originally considered to be Arab lands, right? Arabs were in person originates from Arabia, right? Whose parents, in particular one's father, it originates from Arabia as well, and so unless those people were able to prove that, then generally we call them Arabized people, right? So most of the Arabs today actually are not Arabs in the original sense, that they are Arabized people. But this is the way that racial identity worked in the past as well. That in the past, racial identity wasn't about colorism. It wasn't about color, right? It was about shared culture, shared practices, sometimes shared religion. Right, but largely the shared cultural values is what made them Arab. So, for instance, Abu Lahab was just as much an Arab as the Prophet, right?
The way they dressed, the way they ate.
Right. The dress was the same. And of course, the Prophet made sort of a distinction in how they wear the turban, the color of the turban, things like that. He wanted to distinguish himself, but they're still really wearing the same sort of clothing.
Right.
And I think that that's an important thing to be very clear about. That a lot of times when we think of identity today, especially when it comes to racial identity, that actually distorts our understanding of a lot of the historical texts when we read them. Like, for instance, we talk about like blackness and Bilal ibn Rabah, for instance. I've seen a number of writings and people are like, Bilal becomes sort of the starting point of black oppression in Islamic tradition. It's like almost everybody writes about Bilal. That's really how they focus on Bilal, and I think that's a mistake because realistically, Bilal was he's just as much the starting point of conversations about faith and sincerity and
Yeah.
loyalty to the, but we almost never talk about Bilal in that particular light, right? Because Bilal was courageous, Bilal was strong, Bilal refused to say, yeah, my God is Lot and Azza. He said, no, I'm not saying it. There's one God, this is Allah. That's my God, and keep torturing, go ahead, kill me, I'll die for this. I'll die upon that. We don't talk about Bilal in that particular light. And on top of that, Bilal actually, even though he was Abyssinian, he was the son of two slaves, his mother and father. Baladhiri says his father Rabah was an Abyssinian as well, even though there's an opinion that says that Rabah may have been an Arab. I think there's more reason to believe that he wasn't an Arab, because otherwise Bilal, there was no reason for Bilal to be mistreated, because if his father's Arab, then Bilal would have been treated like a normal Arab. But at any rate, Bilal is actually born in Arabia. He's raised in Arabia. There's very little reason to believe that Bilal had an accent. And so this distortion, things that get distorted today when we think about this. There's actually a hadith, a fabricated hadith that says, there's an implication that Bilal spoke with an accent and he couldn't say ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. He would say ashhadu, right? He found it difficult. So there's a hadith that is fabricated who says, inna sina Bilal sheenun indallah. That Bilal's seen is sheen with God, right? It's a fabricated hadith. Right, so but the point I'm making is that culturally, Bilal was very eloquent. Ibn Kathir actually says, la astallahu, there's no basis for this hadith. And Bilal can min aslah nas. He was one of the most eloquent of people. He had poetry. He had his poetry that he wrote in Arabic. So culturally, Bilal in many ways was an Arab, but except that he wasn't, because his father wasn't an Arab. That he was sort of pushed aside in this particular way.
Yeah, and I was just going to say that it's actually, close to racism to only talk about Bilal in the context of him being a slave or the black Muslim, you see. And that's actually Umar radiallahu anhu, he emphasized that point when someone was talking in a hadith and he said, Sayyiduna a'taqahu Sayyiduna. He said he corrected somebody who started to talk about Bilal in the wrong light. And he said, Bilal was our master. And in another narration, he was before me in Islam. He holds a place above me in Islam. And he was freed by our master. I want to talk about, I want to get the Sheikh's input or bring in an issue that a lot of our kids, so it's one thing to go to your non-Muslim friend or neighbor and say, we don't celebrate Christmas or Easter or perhaps Halloween, because there's religious community that does that and so that conflicts with our faith. So obviously that would make sense to someone who respects this, that we have, as Americans, we have different backgrounds, and then one of the things that should unify us is appreciating our diversity and getting to know each other and respecting each other's convictions. But when you say to your non-Muslim friend or neighbor or whatever, well, I don't do birthdays, or I don't do Thanksgiving, or we believe that 4th of July is haram, then basically what your recourse is to explain that is, well, because American people do that. So now you have separated yourself.
Yeah, to separate yourself, and also you have misrepresented the community, that you've actually decided that you represent what Muslims are at least supposed to believe, right? And I guess it's somewhat similar to what happened, unfortunately, with, unfortunately or unfortunately, with our brother Mahmoud Abdul Rauf, when he refused to stand up for the he was
the original Kaepernick.
Right, he didn't stand up for the Pledge of Allegiance, or with the Star Spangled Banner, or whatever, at the game, and then it caused a controversy. And when he was asked about it, he said that his religious beliefs, that he's not allowed to stand up for a flag, the Pledge of Allegiance for a flag, So and he has Shi'i background, so that was, naturally it was like sort of the anti-Iranian antagonism was really high at the time. So they responded in kind, the great Satan, among other things. So, but you can only represent you. Right. You can only say that, okay, well, I mean, yes, I don't feel comfortable with that. And it's like, I can't say that other Muslims believe this, or share my convictions, but I believe that my religion, doesn't allow for me to celebrate this, And that's one thing. You say, okay, all right, no problem. At least that way, then people may be led to say, okay, well, maybe just you're this individual Muslim, They say, well, we don't, right? So, well, quite a few Muslims. I've met quite a few Muslims who celebrate Halloween, they go out and
Christmas and everything else,
and other things like that, So or things like, I know plenty of Muslims drink wine, so you find it quite often, you see. So,
but I think in terms of my concern is in terms of the why are people saying this? Like, actually, Sheikh Salman al-Auda, Allah yafukah, one of the great scholars of our time, he was put in jail recently because he's a good scholar that would not, buy into the political games of his country. And so he was asked once about celebrating birthday. And he's a Saudi Arabian scholar, and his training and scholarship is Hanbali originally, but he would be accepted as a Wahhabi, Saudi, scholar, Salafi. People would say he's Salafi. And so he said, I think we've delved into something that's outside of the parameters of religion, and we've made it a religious issue. He said, from the terms of going out to the way non-Muslims are in their societies and trying to bring all of that here, I would feel that there's some dislike as a Saudi. And he made a beautiful nuance, I felt, when he said, but if I was having my family living in those lands, I wouldn't be importing any culture. And so my mi'yar, what do you call that? My standard or criterion would be, is this conflicting with my religion anyway? Are my beliefs, if I celebrate a birthday, do the people think that's a Christian thing to do? And so equating American customs with Christianity is a fault in and of itself. It's a mistake in methodology, not in opinion. It's just a simple mistake in methodology. We are in a secular country that happens to be most of its inhabitants are Christian. So there are a lot of customs. Like, for example, I walked into a mosque and the brother told me you need to put your tie at the front here. He's the mu'adhin of the mosque. He gives that adhan every day. And actually it was, I'm not going to say. So we were talking about the mosque earlier. And they have some other good stuff. But and I said, why? And he said, well, because this is like, for the kuffar, this is a kuffar thing, And I was like, no, it's not. He was like, no, it's a cross. It represents a cross. And I said, and who told you that? He said, we all know that. And I said, who's we? Who are you?
They say.
Yeah, you see. And so I think it's important for us to decipher before we start going around saying things. I think one concern I'd like to talk about is the quickness of the Muslim community who are not trained scholars, who are relying on some things they heard randomly, and they use the word haram very loosely.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, your thoughts?
Yeah. It's definitely a norm. It's been this way for much of my life. You always come across people who go that way, who feel like that they have the tools to offer an accurate analogy between things they're reading in the Quran and the waqi', the lived reality of people. So people sort of just they stretch their the application of things to situations where you can't find a precedent for it. It's like, okay, well, who says that? Other than you, who says that? And no one can usually sort of come up find anybody to actually support those opinions, But this is what I guess you're saying was a part of the sort of the Protestantization of Islam, And that doesn't mean I'm not against Muslims reading the Quran. And I actually think Muslims should read the Quran on a regular basis, right? Everyone should read the Quran on a regular basis, and I think that because Muslims don't, I believe, read the Quran on a regular basis, we find ourselves compromised morally on so many different issues. But it's one thing to read the Quran and you're reading those parts of the Quran, which is the majority of the Quran, which are non-legal in nature. Right? The Quran is largely a book of morals. It's a moral book, a book of ethics. And the number of verses in the Quran which actually are connected to law are between like 300, 500 verses out of over 6,000 verses. So really it's only about 12% of the book itself. As you can say, these are verses that pertain to fiqh, or we generally would call sharia, right? But you can read the book and there are story lessons to take from the book, like the story of Yusuf, alayhi salam, and other stories that are there that the average Muslim can comprehend, and we can speak about them. We can talk about how this applies to your life. But when it comes to actually now entering into the realm of halal and haram, it's like, well, you require a little bit more, understanding. And one of the first requirements is that you know the Arabic language. And I don't mean just you speak Arabic and you grew up speaking Arabic as an Arab, right? But you learn the language of the Quran, right? Because not every
you have to learn the stuff.
And then consulting just like the lexicons, Lisan al-Arab and Qamus al-Muhid, Misbah al-Bunayya, Mukhtar al-Siha, Mufradat Afad al-Quran.
He's giving a compendium of resources that a Muslim scholar would use in order to find out how words imply meanings that relate to Islamic legal rulings. Whereas if you're just a person born and raised Arab, you're probably not familiar with all of that. So I just, before we go to Sharif, so I just want to say that I think it's safe for us to say that before you go around commanding or for example, prohibiting things, we're going to say this haram, that's haram. You should feel a sense of reverence for the place you're putting yourself in. And don't treat religion as an aspect of your culture. Like you're controlling people's behavior because this is what I thought I knew. Whereas, and you have basically no basis from the Quran or an ayah or hadith, or even I read this in the Imam Malik or Abu Hanifa has said, and some people say, well, our family's Hanafi, and so we know everything, and maybe find out many of those things are not Hanafi. Anyway, Sharif. Alaykum salam wa rahmatullah.
It's an important topic. I have a question, for both of you, just to provide your thoughts. America is seen as a fabric of different, diverse communities. Or at least, that's the majority of its history has been that way, and shall continue to be that way, despite other political ideas now. But so, I think I guess for me, I'm trying to think, trying to balance, having an Islam as American as apple pie concept, which is where we're kind of not assimilating, but you might not be able to tell a Muslim from an American just on their face, let's say, versus having the different diverse communities within Islam being accepted for what they are, right? When I was taught diversity, like diversity training and stuff like that at school and at work, you accept someone with their culture, right? You don't try to fit them into someone else's culture. So if you have a Chinese American, you accept their Chinese culture and their background, and you accept that Chinese culture and background to be just as American as this other background, And so that's what diversity is supposed to mean. You accept the person with their cultural, understanding, their cultural kind of norm. And you don't try to say, well, this is American. American is all of those things. So how do we shift the dialogue, let's say, if that's important, maybe you don't think that's important, from saying that Islam is as American as apple pie, to saying that, well, an Indian Muslim and an Egyptian Muslim or a Moroccan Muslim or a Sudanese Muslim is just as American as any other American. And your thoughts on that?
It's a very good point, important point. And I think that one of the things that we have to understand about America is that America actually is very special in that it is a country, it probably is the only Western country that actually has as significant of a the amount of diversity that exists here, racial diversity exists here, compared to any other Western country. So, for instance, Europe, you see, largely French people, largely French, and German people, largely German people, and of course there are some minorities in these countries, but America itself was established even though, well, we can't say necessarily America was established with the ideal already realized, but at least it was considered to be somewhat an ideal that people in America would eventually become represented based upon their particular merit in whatever contributions they bring to the country, rather than their skin color. Even though it started off with a focus on, okay, citizenship was based upon being white at one time, at the very beginning, but eventually a lot of these things changed. But America has so much more racial diversity than so many other European countries. And so when it comes to Islam or Muslims in this country, I would agree that, yes, that Muslims, different parts of the world come with a specific cultural nuances, right? And those things should be celebrated. Now, on one level, we can see America as, or the constitutive races of America as European and African, right? Or the black and white, right? Because fundamentally, you can't have whiteness without blackness, So even the very fact that citizenship in the very beginning was contingent upon being a white Anglo-Saxon, we would say, that you can't be a white person without there being someone who's not white. So, and at the time, the non-whites, or we're talking about the black slaves, and of course the Native Americans themselves weren't even necessarily even in the purview of potential citizenship. And so fundamentally, if we focus on the black and the white elements of America, then when people immigrate to America, although there's generally the sense that there are two options, and the only option I'm really going to go with is to try to integrate into the white option, right? That the other option has always been there, right? But I've been telling Muslims for a very long time is that, okay, well, these really are not the only two possible options, right? You don't have to integrate into whiteness, and you don't have to integrate into blackness either. That you can come into America and just be you, right? But we do have to acknowledge too that maintaining your cultural independence fundamentally means that once you become America, that you lose a certain amount of authenticity, at least cultural authenticity with regard to your original country of birth or your ethnic roots, wherever the country that may be, right? And what I mean by that is, for instance, that one particular element of being an American is speaking the English language, I would say. Right, you're not going to have in America, I don't believe we're going to have in America where every person who comes to the country is going to be accommodated according to their particular language, right? See, now of course we know the English is the number one and most widely is official language, but then number two is Spanish, right? More people speak Spanish after English than any other language in the United States, but I don't foresee a time coming where there's going to be a third sort of, it'll be a Punjabi, or it's going to be, Egyptian dialect, or it's going to be, you understand? I don't foresee that, So there are certain aspects of being a citizen of a country which somewhat demand from you that you learn what we call the lingua franca, the sort of the universal language of communication. Right, and without that, then you can't really be authentically American, but you can maintain your cultural points of differentiation from we call the dominant cultures. Yeah, I think the sister is actually.
Can you hold it for 1 second? I'm sorry, I just wanted to make one comment on that. And what he's saying is an ayah in the Quran. Once I mentioned this, and some people got upset with me, and they said, "Imam, you're trying to make us become Americanized." And I said, no, I'm trying to Islamicize America by your beautiful presence here. And I hope you understand what I mean by that. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا مِن رَسُولٍ إِلَّا بِلِسَانِ قَوْمِهِ لِيُبَيِّنَ لَهُمْ. So the ayah talked about the nature of prophethood and messengership, which after the death of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, خِطَابُ اللَّهِ لِلنَّبِي صلى الله عليه وسلم بِالْخُصُوصِ الآن يُعَمْ الْأُمَّةِ. That whenever God would talk directly to the Prophet, peace be upon him, teaching him how to be a leader and how to carry this message and giving him a special noble platform as the messenger. Now all of those come to us. We're all the messengers of Islam to this land. This is why whenever it says, وَلْتَكُمْ مِنْكُمْ أُمَّةٌ, I prefer the opinion that says تَجْرِدِيَّة بَدَلًا مِنْ تَبْعِيدِيَّة, which means from all of you people should be a nation. Your nation, from you should come a nation, a whole, not just a group, the Amr bil Ma'ruf committee. But every Muslim who's reading the Quran and following this Islam should be carrying this message to other people. So people say, Imam, you know, the Mexican community I know, they have their little enclaves and they speak Mexican Spanish and everybody and they're fine and they have, I said, but for them, they're not carrying a message to society. We are responsible by virtue of migrating here to carry this message to the people. And this idea of secularized attitude and putting da'wah in the job of the imams or the interfaith committee, which often in the interfaith committee you find the wrong people altogether, misrepresenting Islam and creating problems there. So what I'm saying is this. All of you who have migrated here to America are a blessing to this country as you are, the way you are. When they come as you are. This is the good application of it. This is internal. So, you have something special to offer this country, wherever you came from. You have beautiful things from your culture, like you started the whole talk off with. لِتَعَرَفُوا. They will learn. People will learn from you special things. When I was in Kuwait, and we had the Arab and whatever it was, AWARE was some acronym. So there would be all these different expatriates from Europe and America that would come. And they would meet Kuwaiti Muslims and they would visit with them, and sometimes Lebanese and Egyptian would come and visit. And they would appreciate our values as a people. And because they're in their land, on their turf, they felt very comfortable being here. Now a lot of Muslims feel shy to just stay who they are and speak as they are because they feel like, oh, well, maybe I won't fit in, or my accent. Well, you should have a desire to learn the English language as per the Quranic injunction, as we are all carrying that we should learn the English language. That's an Islamic guidance. And we should not create little, a lot of the brothers create a problem even psychologically for their wives. They bring her over, she doesn't know any English, and they keep her locked up in a thing. And this is completely not helping anyone, her or anyone else. And so that integration in opposition to assimilation. Assimilation where you lose your values and your beliefs that make you who you are, and you now start to change your beliefs and practices, and even shed worship regimens because you want to fit in with people who don't do that. And so you should be very comfortable doing that. So, but here's the other part of the dynamic. When you tell your kids, you're Pakistani, you're Egyptian, you're Syrian, you're whatever, and they're not. They're Americans. And that's your choice. I hope I'm not coming off as blaming anybody. I'm just speaking facts. You have chosen to live in this land and your children are born here and they're coming up here. And it's great for you to try to teach them the language of your heritage at home. That's great. I've never said don't do that. But make sure that people feel comfortable growing into their skin and don't feel like there's something wrong with being American. So while they should respect you and appreciate your values and where you came from, and not demean you or belittle you because you're different from them and the standard culture here, right? At the same time, you have to respect them, your children, and appreciate that they have a certain way of thinking, and I can't really put it into words, and I want to give it back to the Sheikh because we have his beautiful presence here. That there are certain things that I found that are actually very similar to most Eastern Muslims who go back through to a caliphate which once existed, which kind of standardized a way of thinking and a certain attitude of religiosity. And I've even found it in Jewish and Christian communities who come from the East. There are certain attitudes and mentalities that are common in Eastern cultures that have their value and have their need, and that's something that people here can learn from that. And there are certain attitudes, people coming from America, and even from Europe to America, there's a little bit of a difference, that it's just a different way of thinking and processing information and dealing with situations. And so there's a whole lot of stuff here. But I think this ta'arafu, we should not be monolithic in our homes that those are the Americans, they're disbelievers, we are from such and such Muslim country, and so you need to be from that. And do not be like these people, right? I've heard many, many complaints, and I've seen with my eyeballs before I was imam or anything like that. I was a youth director and leading a basketball camp and team for a mosque. And I got to know kids before I was known as anybody of knowledge. I still have my hat turned back with my goatee, listening to Snoop Dogg at that point. Okay, just so you know. Okay, I was just new to the community, right? And so watching those Muslims come up and see how, as I started to learn how, I started to see now they change with me. And I see how they are in front of their parents. And so we need to create an environment where you can be American and Muslim, and there's a value and a moral construct where there's not a problem with that. And we should expect that generations to come. Right now, I will be honest with you, where we're in a very critical time of a very dangerous situation. And Sheikh Abdullah and I have talked a little bit about this. The youth, because we created a situation where they felt foreign as Muslim to being in this country. So where did they go to find their moral? They went to college and the cool crowds and the movements going on there, and now they're buying in, in masse to whatever is going on in college. So I'm sorry, I'm going to please. The sister had a question.
I'm curious, especially your point earlier about being American and accepting some American customs. One of the things that comes into that discussion is that sentiment that we should imitate the disbelievers. So where does that sentiment come from, and how would you comment on that? How does that play into things like celebrating Thanksgiving or those kinds of things?
So those didn't hear the question. So she's asking about the question of imitating disbelievers, and how are we to sort of engage with this particular teaching that the Prophet ﷺ in the hadith said, "Man tashabbaha biqawmin fahuwa minhum," that whoever imitates a people is one of them. And so if we're talking about culture, and we should be celebrating cultures that we share with people who are not even believers, then how do we reconcile this apparent tension or contradiction between the hadith of the Prophet and that particular encouragement, the point of encouragement to embrace your people? Well, when the Prophet ﷺ was talking about imitating people, he's talking about imitating people in things that exclusively are part of their moral code, which are in direct conflict with Islam, right? So tashabbuh in this age to me would be, Muslims having Muslims celebrating gay Muslims, for instance, right? Because this is something non-Muslims were doing. Muslims didn't. Now all of a sudden, because Muslims now have embraced LGBTQ, that you see this come up from time to time. Also, let's celebrate them. Tell them it's okay to be the way that they are. Right, and so that now that's a serious moral conundrum we find ourselves in right now. You see, or it can be something related to a different religious group, whatever. That we embrace other people's morality, right? That clearly Allah Subhanahu wa Taala does not approve of, right? So, and sometimes it can be in practice too. Like if there are certain practices which are distinct to certain religious groups. So, for instance. Priests, they wear the collar, right? So let's imagine the imam comes out tomorrow, he has one of those priestly uniforms on.
I just want to tell a funny story real quick. Please hold that.
Go ahead.
I was just at the MJA conference, the Assembly of Muslim Jurists of America. And wallahi, it was the funniest thing. I'm not going to say who, but a prominent scholar who has been here for, I'm going to say more than 10 years, for sure, because I remember reading his stuff. He came up and he's wearing a black dish dasha, and he has the white dish dasha under it, and there is 100% a priest collar under. So I went to the Sheikh, I said, Sheikh, شكلك يعني قصيص يعني. And I was smiling, and he said, what? And I was like, yeah, you look like a priest up there. And he was like, what are you talking about? I'm Azhari, and I was like, maybe in Egypt you're Azhari. Here, you look like a priest.
Yeah, right.
And they said, if some non-Muslim came in here and said, what is that? And they said, that's the Muslim. They have a Muslim Catholic priest now. So anyways, I'm sorry.
Yeah. So something like that, or that's another idea. Another.
Christmas. Yeah, Muslims.
Oh, right, exactly.
And they'll say, well,
Muslims
this is
take
just
the
a Christmas tree.
things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's part of
Yeah.
a religious holiday.
Right. If everybody's celebrating Halloween, we're going to do it too. And we have Muslims doing, like in where I come from, they call it Halaloween. So it's changed it. Because they're afraid. They think that we don't have this in our kids when they grow up. They're going to think that Islam's not fun. And I really think that that's a cop out. There's other ways to
make your Eid awesome.
Right.
Yeah, if you're your fault, you make Eid awesome.
So yeah.
I think also on this one, and that's what a scholar is. See, he just basically, if you go into the commentary, فيما يخصهم في شعائرهم الدينية. If you go into the commentary of the hadith, they said من تشبه بقوم فمنهم النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم كان يتشبه بالعرب وكان منهم. لكن هذا لا يخالف الدين بالأصل. So the Prophet ﷺ, he was an Arab and he looked and functioned like an Arab man. Now at that time, 95% of Arabs were polytheists, right? So that wasn't a problem. It is whenever it came to something that the religious expression, or like he said, going along with something that's sinful and accepting it as normal. It's one thing to say, well, in America, different people have, we talked about this in the political discourse. People have different religions and beliefs and practices and lifestyles. I'm not here to force anyone else how to live, and I'm not here to chastise people for being different. But this is a, sinful act, and there is no such thing as a marriage between the same genders, Yeah.
No, so you're getting sleepy. I've been watching it the whole time.
This is one of the most well-behaved. Who's your dad? Where's your dad? Where's your dad? Whoever's dad is, please teach me. Okay, I'm failing. I'm just
No, come on.
تفضل.
Can we have some concrete advice, like how to, while raising your kids in America, how to navigate, like when they go to public school, like should we homeschool them or like Islamic school?
Yeah, right.
Or like all the stuff you talk about, like Halloween and they say Christmas, they say other stuff, like some concrete kind of advice.
Concrete advice, concrete advice about navigating American society. I have a few things to say about that, and there are things we can do at Islamic schools to make them better, for starters. I'll just start there. So I'm actually on the board of an Islamic school in my part of the country, where my children, they attended. Well, my son is still attending right now. My daughter, she graduated last year. And one of the things that we do there with parents is that every time a family applies for their children to come to the school, we have an interview with them. And we interview them to let them know what our philosophy is and to see whether or not they're on board with our philosophy. Right? If the parents are not on board with the philosophy, then we just say, okay, well, no, you're not a good fit for the school. Right? I think that in itself is one of the important things that helps to increase the quality of the environment to begin with. When you have people who are like-minded, together in schools, and the children themselves grow up with with children of like-minded families, that in itself helps to increase the educational experience, right? And I think that generally what Muslim schools do is that they just look and check to see if you say Muslim, say, hey, Bismillah, come right in, right? And so that's just part of it, Some other policies we have are things like, and of course we can't control what people do at home. We discourage them from watching television during the week, especially during the week, and from coming to school wearing brand name clothing or having things on their backpacks, among other things like that. Now the reason is that these are some of the major factors that we feel lead to a lot of harm to Americans in general. It's like, that the corporations who are directed towards us and towards our children, trying to get our wealth, and also trying to manipulate us with regard to their new sort of ideologies or philosophies. So for instance, like right now, with the combination, and this is one thing I talked about last night when we were discussing the issue of LGBTQ matters, is that there is a marriage between feminism and LGBTQ but both feminism and LGBTQ pretty much are the offspring of Marxism, right? In that there's this belief that that if we rid ourselves of societies that are arranged in hierarchical manners, we get rid of the patriarchy, we get rid of all forms of hierarchies, and even we get rid of definitions and labels, that everything will be equalized, and then we'll have lasting peace. Right? And these ideas have crept into educational system. They're in movies. They're in the regular TV programming. Right? So at home, it's like, well, if you have cable, I would say get rid of cable. If you don't have cable but you watch TV on a regular basis, don't watch those regular sitcoms. Cut them out, right? Yeah. Or if you can't, just get rid of the TV altogether. Right? And of course, maybe that's too extreme. I have a television, I do, but my son, he watches, like, we have Netflix, and he has his own programs he watches, these cartoons, and I generally watch them with him, right? So issues in parenting, issues in schooling, issues in parenting, issues in basic, overall just basic consumption, right, of ideology, that we get surprised when our children come home with certain attitudes and certain ideas, not realizing the whole time it had a lot to do with us not monitoring them closely and not being in their lives the way that we should be in their lives. So there's just a few things I
want to emphasize what he just said. It is a big disease in the community. Number one, my kids do not have smartphones, and I don't plan to give them smartphone. I don't know why it's so common for 10, 11, 12, even for me, particularly with young boys. Up until they're in college, I don't think they need a smartphone. But what he said about letting the kids be on the TV or the video games or the iPhone or the computer and just letting them be, I think that is super dangerous. And one of the things and I'm the same as him in that if we watch a cartoon or I take them to the movie, we'll watch it, and then I will be watching, there's some benefit or some moral thing, but then I will see some of this programming. So I will say, whenever that happened or someone said this, what do you think about that? And I will listen to them. And sometimes I will see that it really didn't touch them. Maybe they started to think in a different way. And that's that's what he's saying. We have to be woke in a different way. So it goes back to the very beginning of what he said, which is reading the Quran and reading the life of the Prophet and making sure that you spend a good 30 minutes of your day every day, best with your family, with the scripture.
Yes.
And then while you are entertaining yourself, which the Prophet entertained himself, as a exception to the norm, outside of work and responsibility and worship, then you are careful to know that there is a atheistic system,
hedonistic,
hedonistic.
No, I'm sorry for cutting you off.
No, I cut you off. You're our guest. Please forgive me. Stuff.
No, I think the sister, she had something.
Yeah. There were two sisters actually. Go ahead.
The one right in front. Yeah.
I have two things to say. The first thing is, I just reiterate what you said about we have to tell our children born here that they are American and not Indian or Pakistani or something. And I had one thing in my son, which is now 12 years old, somebody, an Indian, asked him, where are you from? And he said, North Carolina. And he said, no, that's not what I'm asking. He said, where are you actually from? He said, I'm born in Cary, North Carolina. So I had to explain it. I think he's asking, where are you from India? He's asking your ethnic background. So that goes back to, because these are the questions they're asked usually in school. And my kids face them when they say that, no, you're not Asian, you're Indian. And he's like, but India is an Asia, what are you talking about? He's like, no, you're not Asian, you're probably from Indian descent. So we constantly teach them the same thing so that they are able to answer that. But the second portion is that I was listening to a video which was 13 minutes long, which was telling me about how the sameness and the differences between the time Islam is about the people and the different scholars, caliphates, the schools, and then it broke down into further, that by the time the end of the video I forgot what the first one was. But it seems like the society within Muslims are divided so much beyond the four schools that hunt and shop and model humbly. But at the same time, and I'm telling this from Indian perspective, I don't know about the other countries. Within my town in India itself, they are like divided to a point that they wouldn't eat at each other's house because of their beliefs. And it is bizarre to see in my last 15, 20 years how it has gone. Coming here, I've gone to so many states, there are so many mosques which are differentiated between these, that I don't feel comfortable going to one because of those beliefs in there which are so strong that you don't feel the same way. And it is so hard, which is why I feel blessed coming here because we're all together. But it's being across, and it's the same people who come migrate from there, and we are so divided these days that it is so hard to teach them, whether it's WhatsApp or all these videos going around and all these stories of hadiths of somebody doing magic, and you gotta believe them because there is India is famous for Ashmir Sharif, everybody knows that. And the stories going on about what magic that person did about and all this, and I just said, well, what are you talking about? How are you spreading these? So we have to be careful about that also. That goes beyond American Muslims, but it's like the daily thing that we all, ignorance is one thing that I can say, oh, so let these people talk about it, or I'm not going to do anything about it. Or I speak up, but then I hear all this backlash, then immediately the first thing will come and say, you're not Muslim. You're talking like a non-Muslim, you're not our people. You've become American. If I go back to my people and say that, then why are you doing this? Oh, you become Western. You don't know what it is.
Critical thinking.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's kind of the things that I try to teach my kids how to deal with them, but sometimes it's hard because we are dealing with it every day too.
Right,
It's
right.
our culture, and I'm from West, my husband is from South of India. We both have clashing cultures too, so we have to go through that where they have a whole different
Bless your heart.
things about Islam, and it took years to go through. It's like, no, this is not the norm. What are you talking about? So those are the things that is kind of important when people come to America too. In meeting with these cultures, we need to be more open about talking our backgrounds as well. How do we clear their backgrounds and not just ignore them? But what's your view on that?
I know two sisters in the back that have been waiting patiently, but I'm going to try to not speak too much about this issue, but what I'm hearing realistically is really you articulate something which is the norm pretty much among every people, which is that there is not a monolithic sort of way of being who you are, right? Like, there's not all Indians are monolithic, all Pakistanis are not monolithic, all Arabs, Egyptians, Syrians, they're not all monolithic, either ideologically, religiously, and in other ways, right? Right, and we should not see that as necessarily a negative thing, just more so just a normal thing. And now the Quran tells us, Allah says in the Quran, وَلَوْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ لَجَعَلَ النَّاسَ أُمَّةً وَاحِدًا وَلَوْ شَاءَ رَبُّكَ لَجَعَلَ النَّاسَ أُمَّةً وَاحِدًا. If your Lord had so willed, He would have made you into a single nation. وَلَا يَزَالُونَ مُخْتَلِفِينَ إِلَّا مَا رَحِمَ رَبُّكَ. But they will continue to be different from one another, except for those that Allah shows mercy. Right? وَلِذَلِكَ خَلَقَهُم. And for that reason He created them. So the Quran, Allah is constantly telling us, that, I didn't make it that way. That's not what I intended it, the way I intended it to be. Even among black people, white people as well. White people are not monolithic. Right? They're not. There are hierarchies in whiteness. Right? There are different cultural expression in whiteness. I mean, black people are not all the same ideologically. Some black people, again, they like the victim narrative. Some of us, we don't like the victim narrative, right? Most of us may be Democrat, but some of us are conservative, right? A lot of us is conservative. So there's not any monolithic sort of group of people, right? As for the issue of like your children, and so identifying it as I'm from North Carolina, I actually appreciated that I think your son, you said, right? That he insisted. So, I think he knew where I think his response was like, listen, you know, I know what you're asking. I understand exactly what you're asking. And I'm not going to give it to you. Because you're fundamentally saying to me that you're being American, your Americanness is more authentic than mine. If I were to answer you, then I would actually be conceding ground, right? That you have more right to be here than I do, right? Because like, I imagine it's probably a white person, or I don't know, some other person, maybe even a black person asking the question. It's like, well, where are you from? It's like, well, where are you from?
Yeah.
Right? Where are you from? Because everybody came from somewhere else.
Yeah.
Right, you know, and of course we do understand that there's some people been here longer than others, and some people are part of the original constitutive members of society. But if I grew up here and this is all I know, right? You know, yeah, I know my background, I know my ethnic background, I know my roots, I know where my parents came from. Yes, I know that, you know, and I don't deny that. You know, but I also know that if I was to go back there, they're not going to treat me as an authentic member of that society. Right? So the only thing that I can do is say, hey, you know what, I'm an American. No, I'm not Pakistani. Right? Yeah, my roots are Pakistan, but I'm not Pakistani. No, I'm not Egyptian. My roots are in Egypt. Yeah, my parents' roots, but I'm an American. Right? Because I can relate to this more than I can relate to that.
And on that point, before we get to the sister, I've had many young people come to me and say, you know what, I just went ahead and went along with my parents. I said I'm Egyptian, or I said I'm from Pakistan. Then I go visit Egypt or Pakistan, and then those people say, you ain't one of us. With one conversation, you're not. And so, anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. Could you? I'm sorry. Can I?
Sure.
Can I just? I remember that I saw the sister in the green hijab also before. Is it possible first? Well, hopefully we have green. I think both of you have green hijab on. Maybe we hear from both of you first, and before we comment, you know, maybe that we can give more people an opportunity to.
Well, my comment relates to your connection of feminism and Marxism, and I would caution us to be careful of even universalizing what we're calling feminism.
Yes.
There are a variety of women-centered ways of knowing, and under that umbrella is a variety of feminism. I would agree with the linkage if you're talking about white Western feminism that emerged from the late 19th century and early 20th century women's movement. Otherwise, I'd just say, just be careful that you're not trying to universalize.
No, I'm not at all. And very, very good, important point taken. Actually, I've studied women's studies, you know, and I've studied history of feminism as well. You know, so when I'm talking about feminism, I'm talking about what is now the dominant form, which is sort of this. It's a very toxic type of, you know, sort of what people call radical intersectional feminism, right? You know, so, right, so.
Dominant where? So I'm just saying.
Here in the country. In the country right now, in the mainstream media, in Hollywood, you know.
No, but you're from Cali, huh? You came to North Carolina.
I'm saying, just be careful. Just be careful not to universalize.
Well, I'm talking about the feminism of Me Too movement, of incriminating men before being investigated and things like that. This is what I'm talking about right here. So, yeah, right, yeah, exactly. So that's what I'm talking about, you know. But yeah, and I said this yesterday too. I mentioned that yesterday that I'm not an anti-feminist, and that there are plenty of issues, you know, that feminists have raised throughout history that I very much support, right, them in that particular regard. But today, when we talk thinking of feminists, there's a certain type of feminism that actually is in the mainstream media, is actually coming out of Hollywood. As a matter of fact, this new movie just came out. Marvel movie, Captain Marvel, right? You know, the woman Brie Larson, she's gotten herself into some trouble because she got political, and prior to this, none of the Marvel actors gotten very political. She's attacking white men and things like that. You know, so they're like, well, a lot of the fans who are really, you're talking about a lot of white men who actually are fans of the Marvel movies decided that, well, I'm not going to see this one. Right, because why you have to come at me like that, right?
Right.
So yeah. So you have, it's like you make an issue where it doesn't exist, or it doesn't have to come up, right? You know. So that's really what. Yeah. So but definitely your point's taken, and I do think, and I do apologize, you know, if people to you, I say, you know, and others who have that concern, if I've misled anyone to think that that any sort of issue raised by feminists is illegitimate, and that we should simply sort of shut close our ears off to what's being said, you know. So I'm definitely not trying to promote that.
Mashallah.
Yeah.
So, but I think it's an interesting correlation. For sure, this is not from the linguistic word of feminist, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was functioning as a feminist in his society, with the way people looked at and treated women, to the extent that Umar radiallahu anhu, when was asked about a woman correcting him, he said, "Kunna la na'uddu lin-nisa'i shay'a." We used to not consider women worth anything. حتى أنزل الله فيهن ما أنزل وقسم لهن ما قسم. Until he revealed in the revelation about women certain things that were completely different. So that being said, what the modern movement that he's concerned about, which I'm equally concerned with, the things like, I can go naked right in front of you and you should not feel like you have some desire about me.
Right.
And I'm like, what? Did you study psychology? You know, come on, let's be scientific now for a moment. So people take that truth about the Quranic revelation and the prophetic, you know, overt concern and uplifting of women in his society to an equal, you know, status in terms of humanity and spirituality and all of that as men, with different roles to play and different natures and all of that. Some things women have some superiority in terms of, you know, understanding emotions and childcare. God clearly preferred them for that. And men have things that they are responsible for and so forth. So what they do is now they confuse that truth, which has its revelatory, revelation-based evidence, and they say, see, now I'm a feminist, because the Prophet was feminist. And so because there's not a real knowledge base guiding that, and this is the whole problem with the modern liberal Muslim movement, is that it's not true faith. There is a cultural association with being Muslim that now is going full force into the modern American political dynamic, authenticating and going along with, taking small little things like, well, the Prophet was a feminist, so what everybody says is feminist today must be good.
Yeah.
And so that's, I think, the problem. Anyways, I'm sorry, sister, I cut you off.
Go ahead.
I had a few questions. One was, I think, in reference to some articles that I wanted to share a link on the website with us. Second question.
Well, I'm sorry, article about what topic?
I think it's related to this topic.
Oh, identity?
I didn't mention it, but you shared it with me on the other.
Oh, the ijma'.
Oh, that was, yeah.
I can share it with the community. He has its open knowledge. Inshallah.
My second question was really something that we just discussed a little bit earlier. But it was the stories in the Quran about Prophet Musa and Prophet Yusuf. They were raised in the nations that they were sent as prophets. So is there any relevance in terms of learning the cultures of those communities? As in, the Prophet Yusuf was raised in, he was kind of literally was raised in
Egypt.
in the household of the Aziz, and he later on became part of the government. Prophet Musa was brought up in the palace of Pharaoh, and later on he tried to do dawah to the Pharaoh as well. So in those contexts, does learning the cultures of the communities that they were going to develop, is that very pertinent in there, and also in relation to us living here in America? Do we need to try as hard to, I suppose, learn the culture to adapt here as we're doing dawah?
I mean, the examples of Joseph and Moses, or Yusuf and Musa, alayhim as-salam, I mean, in some ways, they're somewhat of an anomaly in that the cultures that they were learning were sort of administrative cultures, right, governmental cultures, rather than the culture of the common people. And with regard to Musa alayhi salam, that his particular mission was to convince the Pharaoh to let the children of Israel go. Right? That was largely his mission. And of course, another part of that mission was to convince Pharaoh that he wasn't God and he should stop claiming that he was. But the more important thing was for him to convince them to let his people go. When it came to Yusuf alayhi salam, his being appointed to the higher office of like sort of the place of the treasury, that in itself was again, is an act of justice, right? We get restorative justice, we would say, because of his, the way he'd been mistreated, thrown into the dungeon for things he had for false accusations. So and to reward that, that he was given that particular authority. So there's not much indication in the story that he was obligated to preach a particular message to the governors, right, of his time. So it's hard to really say, at least for me, perhaps Imam John has something to add to that, but for me, it's hard for me to say that these actually serve as real archetypes for the average Muslim, right? But perhaps archetypes for people who are involved with politics, because I guess now we see that Allah, he told Moses to be gentle in how he talked to Pharaoh. If we were to look at the way the Muslims are talking to Trump, I don't think that they're being prophetic, right? Because fundamentally, the Muslims who are involved in politics, they actually are just simply adopting the ways of the party that they have joined with, which is to be very harsh with Trump. Now, of course, you could say, well, Trump, he said this, he said that. Pharaoh said he was God. That's even worse than anything that Trump ever said, right? And Allah, in spite of that, Allah said, قُلْ لَهُ قَوْلًا لَيِّنًا, right? Speak a gentle word to him, right? So I would think of there are examples for those who are involved in politics, but not necessarily for the average Muslim who is never really going to be engaging with them on that particular level.
Yeah, and I think that sometimes people read into the Quran a lesson that could be, it's a reflection, tadabbaru, the Quran, should reflect over it. But I think that, as he said, I think it's taking from those stories, but from an actual ayah, I have read more than one classical mufassir, commentator on the Quran, Ud'u ila sabili rabbika bil hikmah. So call to the path of your Lord with wisdom. I heard more than one mufassir say, ma'rifatu ahwal al-mad'u'in. You need to know the state of affairs and understand how the person you're trying to call to Islam thinks. Know their ways, understand their inclinations, have a common ground to build with them, know how not to offend them, and what things might be appealing to them. For some people, if you just were to talk to them, like for example, here's an interesting thing. I personally boycott the NFL altogether. First, because of the CTA, and basically we're one step away from the Hunger Games here, watching a game where people are just literally ruining each other permanently. There's a large percentage. And then secondly, with the racist slave attitude that's coming out of the NFL. But if a guy here in Charlotte, I'm at an event, and he starts to ask me, did you see the Panther game? I know about the Panthers. I know what guys. I know Cam Newton, right? I know about these guys, and I will converse to him as though I know his situation. Is it the platform or the opportunity to explain to him why I, from a faith-based, moral-based, this is not the time for that, to just kind of build a bridge with him. My dad is a big Republican and all of that, so there's certain things I can agree with him on, a small amount of them, but I can agree with him on about his way of thinking in terms of the what he thinks is conservative, So I will build a bridge with them on those things, and then hopefully that will lead to a constructive discussion on other things. So that's, I think, a standard that for a Muslim to be in a reclusive shell, living in a non-Muslim society, or in a Muslim society, wherever you're at, and not building bridges and getting to know all of the people, I just don't think that that's going to be Islamic. Wallah. Rachel?
So, I guess I have a question in regards to, we talked about how we don't want to assimilate as Muslim Americans. We want to integrate. We want to be socially relevant, to be able to have influence and, hopefully give guidance to those that are open. But I find it sometimes problematic, like when I'm a working professional, and I see that, the the social norm is not conducive to my spiritual growth, right? So, for instance, gender co-mingling, right? Or alcohol being served, or idle conversation that's necessary, right, to be able to be relative. So I guess my question is, we know that, you mentioned earlier how the Quran is a moral guidance, and everything kind of else around it is pretty much up for grab. If your culture promotes it, you can do it. If your culture doesn't promote it, you don't have to do it. It doesn't have to always be halal or haram. So I guess my question is, when navigating in these tricky spaces, right, regardless of your gender or, like whether you're a Muslim male or a Muslim female, what advice, I guess, would you give to us to be able to be firm in our principle, but at the same time not be, because there's a dichotomy I see in the masjids, we have these spaces that are gender segregated, but then we're told, okay, when you're in your public spaces, be relative, be approachable, right? So we're sending mixed messages to the community, and that frustrates me, and it frustrates a lot of my peers, because it almost seems like we wear one hat, but we want to be Muslim Americans everywhere, right? We want to be consistent. So I see inconsistency in our communities, which leads to mixed identities and confusion, which is not promoting the message that we're trying to send. I know there's several questions in there and probably some emotion in there, but I guess what I'm asking is, how do we solve that dilemma? Because we're going to be here, we want to be relative, but at the same time, everyone I think in this room also has some kind of God consciousness that they want to preserve.
Right. Well, I think starting with the example about the how we interact in the masjid as opposed to outside of the masjid, I think that generally, especially in light of the new conversation about the whole unmasked sort of phenomenon, that I think that much of that is the direct result of us misconceiving what the masjid is for. The masjid is supposed to be a place for the remembrance of Allah. It's for dhikr, it's for salah, it's for the recitation of the Quran, it's for teaching about the Quran, teaching about the Sunnah. That is what the masjid is for. And so the way that the masjid was set up by the Prophet, by the way, and I think that's an important thing for people to remember, that that the Prophet ﷺ, women one area, men one another area, that when we try to violate those norms, we have to understand, but fundamentally we are questioning the wisdom of the Messenger ﷺ, right? Did he hate women? No, he didn't hate women at all. But it's like, if this is the place you come to worship God, and you want to try to be as sincere and focused as you can, then you maintain boundaries in the process of it. Now, when you're out in society, of course, people are going to pass by one another, they're going to mix with one another, and of course we try to limit our interaction, at least to the extent of like idle talk, as you said. So that's the first thing. The second thing I would say, in particular outside of the masjid, is that we always have to remind ourselves of our moral priorities. There's in usul, in the maqasid, the realm of the sort of the ethical, or sort of ethical philosophy, I guess you say, that certain things are more important than others. Naturally, so be concerned with preserving our religion, but we have to be concerned with preserving our lives and our physical bodily integrity. With preserving our sanity, with our families, in our honor, and the preservation of our wealth, right? So there's an order of priorities. Some are more important than others, and so we have to try our best to identify what particular realm I'm operating in. If I'm on the verge of overstepping a bounds in this particular area, what is the maslahah? What is the interest that is being undermined, right? If I do this other thing, is there a mafsada, a detriment to what I'm about to do here, right? And what level of detriment is it? What level of interest am I undermining? So And of course, it takes some practice. It takes some time to get there. But not everything is about halal haram either. He says sometimes things is about just makruh, about being this is something disliked, or we call khilaf al-awla, something which is just simply not the best thing to do, right? There are things that could be better potentially, but maybe because of the circumstances surrounding this particular decision, this actually may be the better thing to do in this situation. So I would think about, okay, the moral priorities that we have to keep in mind when we interact with others. But then the other part too, I would say, the last thing I'll say before I conclude is understanding what courage truly is. That courage doesn't mean the absence of fear, right? The absence of fear is what we call, like in Arabic, we call it tahawwur, sort of recklessness, right? Where people are just like, yeah, I'm not scared of anything. If anybody ever tells you I'm not afraid of anything, you better get far away from that person, right? Get away from him. Just run. I'm not afraid of anything. I said, oh, really? You're not? But courage actually is about facing your fears. Right? You stand up, you're like, I'm afraid, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to do this anyway. You say, oh, I'm sorry, but my religion doesn't allow for me to engage with this. I can't be in this particular environment. I can't do this with you, right? Because of my beliefs and my convictions. And so to be willing to potentially offend someone else, even though it's not your intention, but it's like, listen, that God is more important to me than you. And so my God expects this from me, so I'm going to do this, and I'm going to try to do it in the most beautiful fashion, right? I'm going to try my best, But sometimes, even when you do your best, there are just certain people, regardless, they're going to tell you, I was offended by it, regardless. And I'm just one anecdote I'll end with is I remember years when I was a bit younger in Philadelphia, there was a Muslim brother who I knew his cousin. He introduced me to his female cousin, and she this is back when I was a bit more strict about shaking hands. I'm still kind of strict, but not as strict as I used to be on the issue. I don't extend my hand to women when I meet them. But if a woman generally extends her hand to me, I just meet her. It's now Muslim discretion. Okay. But if it repeats, I'll tell them. I say, well, actually, it's not our custom for men and women to shake hands. But at this particular moment, she extended her hand to me to shake it, and I told her, I thought it was being nice. I said, it's not customary for Muslims, for men and women to shake hands for Muslims, And then later I left, Then later on I came back and saw the brother, and he was like, oh, she was hot. She was really teed off, and I was like, why? She said, well, because he said, well, what are you talking about? I'm old enough to be his mother. I'm saying, well, she might be old enough to be my mother, but she still is not an old lady. So I was like, well, you might be. So it was, I didn't mean to offend, but it was just like some people just take offense regardless. Just as if you tell some people that, well, I don't think that that fornication is good, or I don't think homosexual relationships are good. I mean, that's my, I'm not saying you're not a human. I'm not saying that I want you to be harmed, but that's just my beliefs. That's our religion. My religion teaches me that, right? So, but some people will take offense. So again, like courage. So I would say begin is understanding the difference between the religious space and the non-religious space. Secondly, keeping in mind what priorities may or may not be undermined in those interactions. And thirdly, I would just say that we have to become people who are courageous, right? And that way we don't become assimilated into those negative cultures. Rather, we will integrate, and I believe that people actually respect us more, like when we start to stand up more for our beliefs and our practices.
Yeah, and so on that same point, I'll let Summer have another question. So I've found myself in this many times. As he said, there is a very legitimate scholarly analysis of the basis, the illah, of the ruling of why male and female should not be physically touching. And that is, it could incite to desire. So we look at the circumstance I'm in. This is a circumstance where that become a desire, or is it more of a customary respect for space that isn't generally our tradition, but in respecting them and not creating a more uncomfortable environment, and then trying to explain myself and how that might be in such a fast-paced interaction. So, I don't have any problem. Similarly, as he said, I'm not going to go out, but if a woman puts her hands out, I'm going to shake her hand to respect for it. And I don't see a reason why you shouldn't do that in a public interaction. But now, the issue that he said is, in terms of what you're asking, Resham, is if you work with someone. So, for example, I'll give you a perfect example. I'm now the chairman of MECMN, Metropolitan Interfaith Network, and then I work with various Faith in Public Life and Indivisible Charlotte. So I'm starting to see women clergy and women people. So I've explained to them all in a private discussion that, for myself, I've narrowed it down to one simple sentence. In my faith, modesty and chastity are very important, and so we're taught to respect the space between men and women.
Mm-hmm.
So I prefer no physical touch. And I think in that wording, when you say Islam, it's like, oh, your religion and Sharia and all this brainwashing that they have. But when you say faith and modesty, I think their faith, and if they really read their Bible, modesty and chastity. I mean, Mary always wore the hijab. So even then, more than one event and more than one situation, the lady comes over, oh, Imam John, and I'm like, hold on. I'm like, oh. And she's like, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot, you don't touch. And I was like, no, I don't think you have cooties or anything, No, you're not toxic, it's just, if we can, and then sometimes they'll put their hand down, I'll be like that, she's like, oh, now I remember. And so like he said, they'll start to respect you for it, and they'll appreciate it. And by the way, Orthodox Jews are this way, just so you know. All Orthodox Jews have the same exact concept. What was the other thing?
And actually, one of the benefits of the Me Too movement, realistically, has been like a lot of these spaces are becoming more Islamic.
Exactly. No, and that's one time I said it. I was at a college or something, and I mentioned it to the lady who runs the panel about it, and she's like, I think that will be much more professional because men, tend to take an extra tight hug sometimes, or So I don't remember what the other one was.
Creeping Sharia.
Yeah, creeping Sharia. There it is. And what's happening is they're finding from real example that the divine law is not just some old religion. It's actually deep intrinsic wisdom in the human reality to protect human beings from themselves. Summer?
Responsibility on us to be aware of the culture and the mainstream community that's around us and the issues that are happening in Islam, but also how to articulate using kind of common language, common jargon as well. My question was about parenting. I know you said earlier on about monitoring what our kids watch, sitting with them and having discussions with them. Is there anything else you would like to add to that we can take from people's experience?
Mm-hmm.
How do you know that
Yes.
children so that they're more critical thinkers when they go out into society?
Yeah, I've said this a couple of times over the past couple of weeks, I guess, to people, and I feel a bit shy to continue to keep saying it because I don't want to come off as like the perfect parent, but one area up to this point I feel I've been successful with doing with my children, well, in particular with my daughter, has been that I've created an atmosphere at home, well, both me and my wife, we've created an atmosphere at home that my daughter feels very comfortable expressing herself to us. She tells us pretty much everything. Right? She's in high school now, first year in high school. She's ninth grade. She goes to a Montessori chartered high school, and there's a lot of stuff happening there. She went to Muslim school before that, and it's her first time dealing with non-Muslims on this level. One of her friends is a Satanist, and a couple of them are lesbian. Her English teacher is a transgender woman, who actually had surgery to look like a man. And alhamdulillah, she's dealing with it very well, I feel. And she she's always telling us, every single day she comes from school, she's like, well, what happened today? We don't ask her anything. She just, well, we have laughs. We really crack up quite a bit, when we hear her stories about what happens at school. And actually that was something to carry over from when she was in the Muslim school too. She would always tell us stories about there as well. And I think that it's important to sort of create an environment at home where children, they don't feel that if they are honest, they're going to be punished for being honest. And it creates a different type of relationship with your children. And I'm not saying that, that you never be firm with them, you never tell them no, you never discipline them if you have to. I'm not saying that at all. But I'm just saying that if you do discipline them, they know, they understand why it's happening. And I think that's one thing my daughter, she, when I have disciplined her in the past, she knew why it was happening, and she understood, and she knew that it was wrong. So she didn't really question it. She didn't like it, of course, but she understood that it was wrong. So I think that's really key in all of this as well. Doing things together as families, traveling together, taking trips together. And even if you want to watch a movie, from time to time, you go together as a family. Just, sit at home and watch a movie as a family, you see. But just being careful about the more potentially dangerous or harmful types of messages which are there. And if they come up, let's talk about them. Let's talk about what do you think about this, rather than oh my God, it's that reaction. I think is probably not the best, because and I think I'll give you a story about my son. I told this to a couple yesterday. Just this past week, he brought home a little booklet. He's in kindergarten, so he brought home a little booklet with a bunch of pictures of cats and other things next to them. And he colored each picture. And so when we got to the final page of the little booklet, it was a picture of a heart with a little animal with a bunch of other hearts on it, and he painted it pink. And so it had a message on each page, and I would read each message. And when I got to that page, he said, "Don't read that one." And I was like, "Okay." I was like, "Well," and I was like, "Well, why? Why you don't want me to read it?" And he was like, he wouldn't say anything. He was like this and crazy. And I said, "Oh, because of the hearts there." He's like, "Yes." So he was embarrassed. It's like this sort of love thing, So again, with him, it's new. So I'm trying to help make him feel that, listen, don't worry about it. It's okay. I'm not going to do anything to you because you think that you've done something wrong.
Right.
I love you, and if I do discipline you, it's because I want you not to hurt yourself, right? See? So that's the additional advice I guess I would give, is to try to create that kind of environment. I know with some of us, probably too late to try to go in that direction. But again, you never know. You never know how your children respond. They may grow into adults and you try a different tack with them, if they actually will. Because you're treating them as if they are people who have valuable things to offer, right, to a conversation. And my daughter, she'll interject, sometimes my wife and I will get into disagreements, and my daughter's, she'll interject, in the middle of our sort of back and forth, and then we don't say, "Step, get out, who are you? Get out the way, you shut up." It's between the two of them. No. She'll interject some important things, and we're okay. Yeah, you're right. Didn't think about that. So,
any of the brother, mashallah, fellas here, one.
I'm glad you brought up that point that sit down with the family and talk about Quran, and I, from my own experience, I feel every day 15 minutes, set it on, and I did it, and I was worried that I want my children to hear from the Quran, that what you have to pray 5 times, And I did over many years, and what happens is you have a good communication with your children, And every day there's something on mind, and they give them an opportunity to bring it up when you are talking.
Yes.
And not just sitting and talking, no, sit down with the Quran. And it helped me so much.
Right, right.
I lived here over 40 years, and it was like first parenting for me in the West. So I definitely said that because last night, the issues that you discussed, all those issues are just like any other issue. If somebody is worshipping idols, we don't have anything animosity towards them. But we are here to obey Allah. So I have told my children, we are not going to take example from either Muslim or non-Muslim. I'm going to teach you what we are supposed to account. I think that will help children.
Oh yeah. Right, right. Now, before, and I wanted to come to you because you made me remember something I wanted to say earlier, and this relates to the idea that any evil that befalls us is only because it's coming from the outside. I mean, that's a problem. I think to think along those ways. This is a problem not only for Muslims. This is a problem for America in general, right? Because, like, again, we're going to build a wall, right? Because all the evil is coming from Mexico, right? You know, all the terrorists are coming from outside, right? You know, so we're going to prevent immigration, right? And this didn't start with Trump. This has universally been the situation. So America's in a state of denial overall about the harms that it does or has done to others as well, right? You know, and so I think the Muslim community can be that way as well. It's the idea that we think, again, oh, America's filthy, dirty, you know, nothing good can come from that. We can't integrate or assimilate there. You're not an American, you know, because all that stuff is bad and everything about you is good, right? You know, you come to America and go back and you start talking about critical thinking, it's like, oh, you've been Americanized. It's like, it's crazy. to think that get these ideas, questioning things. You're not supposed to question things. You're not being a true to your religion, your culture, right? But in one manifestation of this I see is an area of psychology in particular, where I've seen Muslims often, if something may legitimately be wrong with Muslims, like they have some type of psychosis or suffering from depression, anxiety, whatever, thing like that, we'll say, oh, it's the jinn, right? Or I'm possessed, you know, I might be possessed or something like that, or somebody put some sihr on me. Now, it could be that, you know, I'm not saying it's not that, you know, but it's like we automatically jump to that because it's like, well, it has to be something from outside of me, right? Because a believer doesn't get depressed. A believer can't become insane, right? So it has to be something that somebody did to me, right, that made me this way, right? And so this is why it's possible in the Muslim world that a woman can have a fit, you know, for instance, and they claim that I was possessed by a jinn and still can get married. But if you say that she went temporarily insane, she probably can't get married, right? Because like Muslims, they accept this whole idea about the jinn, but not about psychosis, right? So again, it's not all from the outside, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I agree with you that Muslim immigrants have to, speak English well and understand the American culture and be an integral part and volunteer, understand the political process and all of this. I also think the American public can benefit from some Muslim immigrant values, family values, the way we treat our parents, our elder, work ethic, education, family-based business success. I mean, we have something to offer.
Yes. No, I agree. I agree with that. You know, and I think that those are things that should be on a Muslim political agenda. Right. But unfortunately, because of the way that we approach politics as people who are assimilating into American values, you know, we're not integrating, right? You know, but that whatever is listed among our interests generally don't include like things that would actually improve America, right? Things that we're already doing, you know, that would help improve America, you know. So, so we get limited to, we're just talking about LGBTQ rights, and it's like, well, okay, is that a Muslim interest, right? Or is that just a way for us to maintain a relationship with like certain people who don't call us terrorists anymore. You know, so okay, they stopped saying we're terrorists. You know, so that's the agreement. You know, we'll endorse your lifestyle, and you stop calling us terrorists. But at the end of the day, you know, it's not really anything that's improving our situation. So,
if there's any final questions, I think we're blessed to have a very fruitful discussion, and I appreciate the dialogue. Is there any last questions before? Yes, ma'am. You had a question? Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay, so I think we just want to, thank the Sheikh for coming out and blessing us with his time and the Zaytuna Institute for Zaytuna College. I've got to, because I've been following them for a while, like you said, but yeah, they're college now for some time. So hopefully, as you, those of you that are still here that stayed 2 hours and 15 minutes, mashallah, please give your feedback so that they can kind of, see the value of this type of a program and so forth, and what things that they might do to make these programs better and so forth. Probably, if I'm the problem, then just talk to me or our board here. Inshallah.
appreciate it.
Subhanakallah wa bihamdika.